We have true Hadoop committers here. And someone who has been a Hadoop committer for a while, Dr. Konstantin Baudnik, and then he also goes by Kos Baudnik. And he works for Hadoop. He has worked for many companies, from Yahoo to Cloudera to Karma Sphere to also currently in a company called Van Disco. He's the director of engineering. And he is a Hadoop committer. He is also in the Hadoop Apache Foundation. And then he has gone to higher levels overall in committing. And so he's going to explain to you what it's all about. And we'll wait for him.
Okay, thank you. You almost can hear that in the voice, right? Oh my God, Hadoop committer, it's so cool. So the whole two of them. Anyway, so my name is Konstantin Baudnik. I'm a director of engineering in the company called Van Disco. And we are doing active-active replication for Hadoop. And I'm stealing the phrase from the guy in the lobby saying like high availability is the past, continuous availability is the future. So that's what we do for Hadoop. So anyway, I've been doing distributed computing for about 14 years, I guess. I started back in Sun and doing all sorts of crazy stuff with Java and Genie till I joined Yahoo. And actually, before I go there, I wanna make a note to myself never to talk after Milind, my good friend, because now I don't even know what to talk about. He covered pretty much everything here. But I will try to improvise a little bit. And I'm certainly not gonna talk about how to make money out of the big top of Hadoop ecosystem, because just the existence of this event today shows that the business model works, right? So you can make money out of the events, for instance. Back to the topic. So I want to talk about like a real cause why we're here. I want to talk about the open source that made this whole thing happen, and partially I would be talking about the Hadoop and latest development in Hadoop open source. I'm not sure if there is no Hadoop committers. I got it. It's pretty rare commodity. But anyone, how many of you have ever contributed to open source in any form or shape? So say 10%. Okay, pretty good. Cool. So 10%. So I want to talk about the rest of the huge invisible army of open source committers and contributors who are not here today, who made this whole Hadoop thing possible. Hadoop, Milind explained everything perfectly. Hadoop in today's form and shape looks like that, right? So this is roughly last probably 5 years of the Hadoop development. And it's probably a little bit hard to see from the distance, but what this diagram depicts, it shows all more or less worth mentioning versions of the Hadoop, commercial, open source, in existence since probably 2008, 2009 actually. I cut off the earlier pieces because they're insignificant by now. And as you can see, at the beginning, the Hadoop development was going pretty much in a straight line because like what, 1 or 2 companies were doing this, mostly Yahoo actually. And then right around, what is it, Hadoop 0.20, you can see that the proliferation begins. So you can see that all sorts of slightly different incarnation of Hadoop is jumping into the existence. And you get Hadoop 20.1, Hadoop 20.2, Hadoop 20 append, Hadoop 20 this, Hadoop 20 that. Cloudera comes and did CDH3 on top of Hadoop 20.2 plus what, 900 some patches, essentially making the first commercial fork. Then everybody jumped on. Mapr jumped on. Who else? EMC, IBM, everybody's, right? Everybody and his brother were in the Hadoop space trying to monetize on the distribution. And you can see actually how this horizontal actually scaling just happened pretty much in the span of like 1 year or so. And then, again, you might see here on the right middle, basically, Hadoop 0.20.205, 203.205. which is essentially was the implementation of the security mechanism for Hadoop done again by Yahoo team, which is the Hortonworks now. And this part of the Hadoop ecosystem essentially became Hadoop 1. What was at the trunk back then became Hadoop 2, and from that moment on, we are essentially living in the era of stabilization of Hadoop 1 and active development of Hadoop 2. And by now, Hadoop 1 is declared to be very stable. It doesn't go forward at the high pace. However, Hadoop 2 is literally galloping forward, right? It might be good, right? So I mean, essentially the open source reminds you of like evolutionary development of software, right? So nobody knows where they're going exactly, right? So they try and this approach and that approach, some approaches dies off, some approaches prove to be good enough to peak and keep on developing. You might say it's natural and organic. However, as Milind showed in whatever 25 different slides, there is a lot of different players in Hadoop space. There is NoSQL analytics, there is SQL analytics, there is Cassandras, there is in-memory analytics, there is not so much in-memory analytics, there's BI tools, BA tools, report tools, visualizations, you name it. And when you have that much stuff actually going around and revolving around, you need to have a solid platform, right? And solid platform, think about Unix wars, right? So Unix is like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was 2,500 different Unixes, right? So by now it's pretty much Linux, right? So I mean, the rest of it is, I would dare to say, insignificant probably at this point. You come to the data centers, there's Linux. You come to the finance industry, there's Linux, and so on and so forth. So, and Linux essentially come to the point where the platform is stable. So the user space is not getting broken every single time something changed in the kernel, right? So let's think about Hadoop essentially as the kernel in the Linux, right? It's something. It's a focal point where actually all the attention of all the application developers, all the service providers come in to at the end of the day. So, and if you have a very vague definition of the platform, it would be bad for you because you might end up like that, right? So this is the actual profile of another open source project. And it shows how many differences they have to support in their client software, which is essentially client software, for God's sake, just to cover the Hadoop basis, right? So how many we're talking about? 5, 10, 12. So it's a dozen. And I'm sure it's actually not the biggest screw up actually here, right? So maybe there is more than that. So, but 12 is essentially a pretty significant amount of work to go through every time something got changed or something needs to be fixed or whatever it is. So this is pretty tough. So I want to focus today on what I believe would be the de facto platform for open source Hadoop in the years to come. For how long, I don't know, but I think this is the effort the community is going through, where people would essentially, the client base would essentially come and use it as the solid, non-movable platform. So here's just Hadoop 2, right? So that's the small subset from the first diagram, and as you can see, between Hadoop 2.0 through Hadoop 2.02, there was a bunch of, chaotic, I would say, in a sense, development. And Hadoop 2.02 was more or less the first one usable for the wider audience. However, then come Hadoop 2.03, which was backward incompatible with Hadoop 2.02, right? And as you can see, the Hadoop is labeled as alpha, so which should give you a hint that, yeah, well, you better not use it. Stick to the Hadoop 1. Hadoop 2 is not usable yet. So, however, my claim here is that Hadoop 2 is significantly better than Hadoop 1 performance-wise, feature-wise. It has high availability, and it's actually getting continuous availability. Hadoop 2 has a number of cool new features such as Yarn, which is essentially a resource manager, which allows you to schedule and run applications on top of the Hadoop clusters, not necessarily MapReduce only, but pretty much anything. Stabilization of Hadoop 2 is actually highly important here. So Hadoop 2.03 alpha was, to date, was the last incompatible release with previous Hadoop 2s, right? So I have some data here. Yay, here we go. So what do you know? So between Hadoop 2.02 alpha and 2.03 alpha, there was literally 523 tickets, Jira tickets fixed, right? So out of which 12 were incompatible changes. So basically Hadoop 2.03, if you would use applications on top of Hadoop 2.03, you wouldn't be able to work with Hadoop 2.02. There were a community effort to make sure that Hadoop 2.03 is good to go and we can use it, and we'll talk about the stabilization effort in a minute. But essentially there were a number of the issues found, and that led to Hadoop 2.04 alpha, which had 33 fixes brought in, non-compatibilities, just the stabilization release. And yet, through some additional stabilization effort and integration testing, done mostly by my friend Roman in here, in BigTop, we found another couple of issues which were fixed actually in Hadoop 2.05 alpha that happened to be released just last night actually. And to date, this is the most freshly baked Hadoop in existence, which is, I dare to call, stable. And the reason I am calling this stable, although the official definition of the Hadoop stable is still sticking to Hadoop 1 line, is I believe there is enough momentum in the open source community to stick to the traditional stabilization, paradigm, rather. So basically, if you think about what stable software means, essentially stable means it doesn't break. Stable means you can move forward with the critical updates and fixes, and your early versions would still be good to go as the newer one. So normally stable means that within the stable release there is no abruptive incompatible changes. If you want to make some incompatible feature to be introduced, you actually usually doing the conscious upgrade to the next major version. And that's how enterprise software actually moves forward, so we all know this. If you think about this for a moment, some people might be totally comfortable with having hectic development, right? So hectic development sometimes means that your business cases are popping up at such a frequency that you cannot afford to wait until the next major upgrade will come out, right? So, and many companies sticking exactly to this model of the development. For instance, Yahoo has their own Hadoop implementation, Hadoop branch, which called 0.23, which is essentially very similar to Hadoop 2, but has a lot of the stabilization issues fixed. And it does not bring abruptive new functionalities into the line of the code, so they actually deploy it into these huge kryptonite kind of clusters, right, with thousands and thousands of the machines. And but some people actually might not be very comfortable with the hotcakes here and there because they actually need to run the business on a daily basis, and that's where actually community stabilized Hadoop platform that guarantees an ability to work tomorrow with the similar behaviors you worked yesterday is very important. And here where the BigTop is coming to the picture, BigTop is another open source Apache Foundation product, which essentially has started back in Yahoo days as a framework for Hadoop validation and integration. And it essentially implements a very simple idea. So you can build software stack and you can build a parallel validation stack which would know the characteristics of the software stack in order to make sure that the features are fully tested, fully covered, backward compatibility is covered, performance is covered if needed, and stuff like that. And then you actually can, of course, build the lineage of your validation efforts and see if the new releases are better than the old ones and so on and so forth. So usual deal. It's working good, relatively good for desktop software. I mean, the whole model for the desktop software and maybe the phone applications. But when you start talking about the software stacks, enterprise stacks, the complexity is actually rising exponentially, and pretty much you either have to grow your development organization to incredible sizes just to manage the complexity, or you have to come up with something smart. And we essentially came up with something smart, essentially with BigTop. And as you can see, so this is pretty much the actual test metrics from the 205 alpha stabilization test runs, which is happening in open source on Amazon BigTop clusters. So we are running, what, 4,500 tests actually on 10-ish different platforms. So I think I would claim that this is probably the most extensive Hadoop validation existing today in the world. Nobody in the commercial world, nobody in the education system does the same. So this is the golden standard, I would say, of Hadoop validation. Enough of that. So what's one is talking in the Hadoop roadmap? And Milind kind of expressed his view of that. I would like to comment actually on the previous presenter a little bit. So he mentioned the interesting word Hadoop economy, and he said, yeah, Hadoop economy is changing the world. Yeah, Hadoop economy is essentially a revolution. I think it's very, very interesting that we all sitting here in the place which has condensed history of first 2,000 years of the computing, and we're actually leading the rest of the rest of it forward, or the other 2,000 maybe. But it's actually kind of interesting that Hadoop ecosystem or Hadoop and big data economy does not live in a vacuum. We live actually in the real economy. And I've been in the Silicon Valley long enough to see the certain parallels and similarities to what happened here in 1999 and 2000. So in my understanding, we're living in a hot money bubble again, and Hadoop might survive this bubble, might not. It's to the future to answer. But I think essentially Hadoop future is very hard to prognosticate. So nobody knows what's going to happen. But certainly Hadoop is helping people to do very complex, cumbersome analytics for a very cheap dime. So and this is great. And speaking of the, again, open source side of the Hadoop here, so Hadoop 2.1.0 beta is in the woodwork. So community is working on the next version of the Hadoop 2, which is unfortunately most likely to be, again, incompatible with the current stable Hadoop. Unfortunately, well, I probably should take it back. It's not necessarily unfortunately. The new Hadoop version would have a lot of interesting versions, a lot of interesting features. It would have snapshotting, it would have this and that, and many other things. And it certainly needs to be done. I believe the versioning schema we're using in the open source project is a little bit misleading. So in my opinion, next version of the Hadoop should be Hadoop 3. Anyway, beta would come out probably sometimes this month, maybe next month. As we've seen many times before, stabilization would be long and tedious, right? So I just have this, I should have put it in a slide, I guess, but I have a couple of numbers here, for instance, just to demonstrate how long the stabilization takes. So for instance, in Hadoop 1, in the last 8 releases between Hadoop 1 and Hadoop 1.1.2, there was altogether about 300 bugs fixed, right? So in 3 different components. Then if you take a look into the history of the development between Hadoop 2.04 up to Hadoop 2.05, the yesterday most fresh release, that's about 380 plus 800 plus 219 plus 138. So it's about 1,500 roughly, 1,500 fixes, right, in 6 months, right? So how long is going to take Hadoop beta to get stabilized? We see that the amount of changes going in is actually more than Hadoop 2 had. So that's the question to answer, but my expectation would be probably another year until it will reach the production quality. The question for the people who are using Hadoop, what to do in the meanwhile, stick with Hadoop 1 or try to jump on Hadoop 2, which seems to be actually rock solid and working well. And if you don't believe me, here's another piece of data for you. Out of the 7 commercial vendors for Hadoop platforms right now in the world, 6 of them offering the Hadoop 2-based solutions, services, platforms, and what's not. So companies like Cloudera, Pivotal, Intel, Vandisco, they all, MapR essentially, they all moved to Hadoop 2 space already, right? After all this rambling about destabilization and stuff, so one might ask why stable is good. I will probably leave this question to your exercise, and maybe you can do your homework and find out why stable is good. But it's definitely, it's too wide a topic to cover in 5 minutes. So speaking of big top a little bit, why community stabilization is good. As I said, we do all the stabilization effort essentially in the open, completely in the open. We do not hide anything. The packaging is open sourced. The stack definitions are open source. The validation technologies are open sourced. You can build the Hadoop stack with predefined characteristics. You can test it both in secured and non-secured environment automatically using Puppet deployment script again. My friend Roman is a big hand behind the Puppet deployment here. Hadoop built off the big data, of the big top, is essentially provides you with standardized administration interfaces, same packaging all across the Linux distros and stuff. We can easily and early find if the new Hadoop bits are actually incompatible with the old Hadoop bits, right? So we can see that the tests have stopped working and stuff like this. And you've seen how how intensive the tests are. And essentially, we are the place where the Hadoop ecosystem is being unified. On top of that, BigTop itself is a tremendous tool that helps you to kick off your own Hadoop if you want, a Hadoop distribution if you want. So story of my life, when I joined Vandisco back in January, early January, by beginning of February, we had actually commercial grade Hadoop distribution. So we literally cooked it up in 28 days with ridiculously small amount of the resources. So you can do the same, I'm sure. So anyway, thank you so much. Any questions you have?
Is it a true statement for Hadoop before it is being adapted? There are newer versions coming faster in the Hadoop because of the way they want to get it out with basic features and then keep on adding it. But the versions are faster than people or the world adapting to the using the Hadoop. Is that a fair statement?
So let me rephrase the question to make sure I understood it correctly. So you're saying that back in the early days, the cranking up of the versions were actually much easier. They were coming up much faster than you see right now, right? And the question is why that happens? Is it? Yeah. Okay. So, well, I mean, again, the technology is good, then it's bad, then it's stable, right? So when technology is good, everybody's, piling up and doing a lot of things because there is a lot of room to improve, a lot of room to add new features, and essentially you're trying to push the software out at the faster pace so people can start adopt it and can give you feedback, right? Once you start getting feedback, you essentially start revising the original design assumptions. And that's where you get to the point where you understand that your original view of the world was somewhat incorrect, and you start redesigning. And that's where software gets bad, right? Because redesign is usually a painful process. And then after some amount of struggle where the releases are few and far apart, you come to the plateau where technology becomes stable, essentially. You know how you move it forward, you know how to develop it, you know how to fix it, you know how to add new features. You get a lot of players attracted to the platform exactly because the platform is stable, so you know what to expect. And I think essentially we are going exactly to the point where the platform becomes stable. I mean, Hadoop 2 platform becomes stable. Hadoop 1 wasn't, I believe, that widely accepted. I mean, I think I've seen some numbers before, literally like lesser than 23% of the enterprises are actually using Hadoop or considering Hadoop as a POC, right? So there is a huge amount of uncovered ground, terra incognita or whatever it's called. And I think more players will get into the ecosystems, more stable it will become. Lesser releases essentially we will have. Maybe just bug fixes and stuff, but major releases would be again. JDK is a good example, right? At the early days, there were 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, then 1.5 was a little bit further away, then 1.6 were a little bit further away. JDK 7 essentially took, what, 2.5 years, right? So, anyway.
I don't see any other hands up, and should I thank you for an excellent talk?
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Thank you, guys.